Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming and attending the panel. We are here to talk about capital. Access to capital, the right kind of capital at the right time, is really critical to your community revitalization efforts. And so, as Melissa said, we are going to talk about some innovations in the capital markets that I think may be very applicable to many of you, and also an innovative use of an existing tool, new market tax credits. Before we get started, I want to maybe create a little bit of a mental framework. I think when you're thinking about something that can be complex like capital, it's nice to have a little bit of a mental model. So I think of it as, on one end, we have very mission-driven capital that may very well have lower economic return requirements, or in the case of philanthropy, zero economic return requirements, but there's a very strong social mission piece. And you don't get anything for nothing, and so the requirement there is usually around outcomes. You want to commit to certain outcomes, track outcomes, report outcomes. And this capital is very dear, it's very limited, and that's often the kind of capital we're always trying to leverage. So when you hear people talk about leverage, they're trying to leverage the value of that very flexible, often inexpensive capital. And on the other end, you have more market-driven capital, and it may very well be that there's also a social component there, and Todd, who I'll introduce in a moment, will talk about that later. And that kind of capital can be in great abundance in the market, but requires market returns, often willing to take equity risk, which is a good thing to find capital that will take more risk. But again, usually that risk requires much higher returns. So we'll be talking about innovations kind of along that spectrum today. And my panelists here, co-panelists, will help us do that. We have Michael Johnson from JP Morgan Chase. Michael is a vice president and program officer focused on the Northeast region as well as national initiatives. We have Debbie Castlemeyer from Northern Trust. Debbie runs the community development investing business at Northern Trust. And we have Todd Rich, the co-founder of Declaration Partners, which is the family office for David Rubenstein. So I am going to start us off by saying a few words about the Accelerator initiative, which Carol and I announced yesterday. And I don't know if there's a slide. If not, that's fine. We had one. But so the Accelerator initiative, purpose-built in LIIF, started working on that almost a year ago. It was actually after this annual conference last year. And Purpose-Built expressed a felt need to accelerate the work of its network members. And capital was identified as a real barrier in a number of ways. One, they really wanted access to national funders, which is, it's very hard for national funders to plug into all these local sites. I think they see value in the model. And they want to make investments, but it's challenging for them to work with 20-plus communities across the country. So a national platform allows those investors to plug in different kinds of ways through the capital stack. Also, many sites the success of accessing local capital, whether that be banks or foundations or CDFIs, it varies across region. Opportunities differ depending on where you are. And so we wanted to create a resource that could be equitably accessed across all network members. And then we also wanted to structure it in a way where we could achieve more flexible capital products, and that's where we leverage that risk-absorbing capital, the most highly mission-driven capital, and by doing that, we can stretch farther, we can kind of fill those what I call stubborn capital needs. So maybe we can be subordinate to a bank, your local bank will only go so far, we can go farther. We have capital grants for permanent capital gaps in your structure. So, for example, community assets like an early care and education center, very low cash flow, can't support debt. A capital grant might be appropriate there. We have equity with a twist, which Michael will talk about. That's an innovative enterprise level capital tool. So something that goes right to the community quarterback that you can use very flexibly, but it does have to be paid back, but it's super flexible. And then the debt fund. And again, that will stretch with higher loan to values, more flexible terms, but it is a debt product, so it does need to be underwritten and it does need to be paid back. But again, the way we're structuring it, we feel it will be more flexible. We've heard from a lot of you that acquisition of land, acquisition of vacant land or operating properties is an important piece, especially at the beginning. We're hoping to support you more with that. So that's the Accelerator initiative. And with that, Michael, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about Chase's interest areas and how they overlap with the purpose-built model, particularly in the context of your Accelerating Cities initiative, which I think is a very nice match. And then maybe tell us a little bit more about Equity with a Twist.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. First, I want to say it really is an honor and pleasure to be amongst you all. This is sort of a coming home for me, a reunion in a way, having grown up in New York City public housing, having written about public housing while I was a graduate student, and now being at Chase. So you guys are really the change agents here, and I'm really excited to be in your presence and to talk with you today about Chase's engagement and partnership here. Our Advancing Cities initiative is a $500 million investment that really looks to bring together local government officials in partnership with CBOs, community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, as well as with CDFIs. The model that we've taken, our model of impact that we've really have put in place, it came out of the city of Detroit, which many of you I'm sure may have been aware of. We've committed hundreds of millions of dollars towards that effort of creating an inclusive growth strategy. At the firm, we are truly focused in on this idea of inclusiveness. We do believe in economic progress, but at the same time, we think that that should not be for just a selected few. And so as a firm, we've been firmly committed to thinking about that kind of work. So just real quickly, the $500 million is a combination of a competitive grant. So November 30th, if you're in it, if you're excited to be a part of that part of the grant making process, that process will close on November 30th. But keep in mind, this is a 5-year initiative. The first year of this work will be interesting. It will be compelling. It'll tell us a little bit more about how cities and CBOs and community groups are thinking about it. But from the scale of city investment, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to think about how at the very top level, the policy level decisions are made to really think about how that impacts the communities that you do business and where you work. And so that initiative is going to be a combination of a grant. There's another part of it which, again, will be coming soon. A portion of that $500 million will be another form of flex capital, which is exciting because when you think about the work that you guys are doing, your capital stacks are numerous to begin with. So this idea of this flexible capital fund, it's not a PRI, it's not a project-related investment, but rather a loan similar to our EQT that looks to provide long-term debt to organizations so that they can accelerate the work that they're trying to do. So we're very excited about that, and it's going to be housed in our global philanthropy team, which is exciting. The last thing I'll say is, as we sort of talk, what I talked to you about EQT, is that J.P. Morgan Chase thinks about the full force of the bank. We do business in a sense that is combined with our philanthropic work. We don't see it just as charity. We are very much driven around data. We're very much driven around outcomes. And so from the very top of the bank, from Jamie all the way down to the program officer, we are fully engaged in this work. And so we're really excited about it. So just from that perspective of our Advancing Cities work and how that sort of ties really directly with the work that we're doing with LIIF and with Purpose Built, I think the EQT model came really years before I actually joined the firm in 2015. And unbeknownst to me, you guys are already setting us up for this sort of Purpose Built model, which we're excited about. The EQT model, Equity with a Twist, is designed, again, enterprise-level capital that goes to those organizations doing the hard work of building communities. And so we were in multiple cities. We were in San Francisco and LA with Bridge Housing at Jordan Downs, one of the most infamous public housing developments at the time in LA, Potrero on the Hill in San Francisco. We were also in Cincinnati, Ohio with the community builders. And then lastly, which I think is critical to this conversation around purpose-built, we were in the Bayou District Foundation. We were supporting them at Columbia Park. I mentioned that and put a pin there because my understanding is that when we provided the EQT funding, about I think $2 million each to each of the organizations, we were on the verge of looking at something in some ways innovative, something that involved a strong level of collaboration. And unfortunately, given the circumstances that happened in New Orleans, was an opportunity to sort of reset. I had a conversation with Jerry, who's on the board, and he made a clear note to me to say, you know, in other places in public housing, you don't get the opportunity to really rethink it. And the unfortunate circumstances of Katrina really let people come back to the table and think about how do we make this more inclusive, more equitable, and much more successful. And so the idea behind the Bayou was just that. Our EQT investments that came early in is just the beginning of that work. And so, again, we're proud to announce that we, in fact, have come back to the conversation and back to the table, not only with LIIF, but with Purpose-Built to really hone in on this idea of equity with a twist as part of the Accelerator Fund. Now, as a $100 million fund, you're thinking, hey, that's really significant. I think the EQT portion of it is that part where it really gives you, the organizations, the flexibility to be able to do your work and do it successfully. Unlike my colleagues here in the bank, who of course have a different sort of way and structure of looking at the actual transaction, you know, the foundation has a place in this, and we certainly want to drive success for you. As I sort of think about also what really how do we look at EQT and the members and the folks that would qualify, or those are sort of eligible and those that are appropriate for this kind of work. The thing that I think comes to mind is that, you know, are you, and I have something about from 3 C's, are you creative? Are you being very creative about the things that you're doing? Are you going sort of beyond your traditional boundaries and collecting and really coordinating with organizations and groups that you may not have? This whole conference has been enlightening because there's been a lot of folks saying, I've gone beyond myself to think about other partners in this space. The other part of it is that's important to us is this idea of creating a community of practice. JP Morgan Chase and our foundation, when we go in and we do grant making, we have a series of metrics that we provide. The purpose-built model has 15 of them, which it just blows me away. Is that we as a foundation have our set, but really Purpose-Built has laid out real specific cradle to college community health and mixed income models and metrics tied to that, which is important. So sort of creating this sort of community of practice and learning and being able to make sure that you're driving those results. And then lastly is why we're here, capital. You need the money to make this thing happen. You need to be able to go and convince others to go into the conversation and invest as well. And so as a bank, of course, unlike our anchor institutions, our hospitals and others who have a certain different sort of mission-driven purpose, we want to come in and be successful with you. And we feel that at the end of the day, our investments will give us a return, an ROI that may not be in the kind of return that we would see from traditional banks, but at least through the foundation, we're seeing the results of change through early education, through these efforts of folks actually progressing and going from high school to college. And then and obviously the big factors around reducing crime and really transforming communities to become communities of change. So with that, I think I'll stop there and look forward to hearing from you guys.
Great, thanks, Michael. I like your 3 C's, better than the 5 C's of credit. Those 3 C's were way better, starting with creativity. Debbie, I think of your work at Northern Trust. I think of Northern Trust as talking about creativity, very creative, very innovative, particularly amongst other bank peers. So could you talk a little bit about your investment practice overall, and then maybe share with folks the innovation that you worked on with Purpose-Built on a school?
Yep. So I work for Northern Trust. We're a bank headquartered in Chicago. We're a trust asset management wealth bank, and my job is to deploy the bank's capital, so our balance sheet, in underserved communities across the U.S. We started doing this in 1995, and we have about $1.9 billion in our portfolio right now. I always say we sit between a bank and a foundation. So We price like a foundation, program-related investment, so we're profit neutral. So we're doing low-cost patient capital to fill capital gaps, specifically in projects and high-performing nonprofits. But we underwrite like a bank, so we need to get our capital back. So that's sort of a little bit different than what you might see in a program-related investment. Most of our investments that we do everything from, we invest in CDFIs, so we do a lot of work where we'll try to bring in CDFIs to work with groups like a purpose-built community to solve specific problems. So a lot of what we do is trying to leverage other capital that we may be investing. So we invest in CDFIs. We invest directly in high-performing nonprofits. So if there's a nonprofit that has a big enough balance sheet and they may have a specific need and they can take on debt, so there's the ability to pay it back. How we always look at it is there has to be the ability to repay. We're not actually structuring repayment a lot of times. We're doing bullets, so 5 years interest only, principal at maturity, where we look at it at the end of 5 years. We really hope that the nonprofit's doing great work and they're still using the money and we'll just roll it over. So it's really an enterprise-wide sort of internal line of credit almost, is how we kind of look at that. We do social impact investments or pay for success transactions. We've done 5 of those. We have another 2 that we're in the process of closing, so 7 total. We do social enterprise businesses. So we invest in nonprofit social enterprise businesses. We invest in low-income housing tax credits through nonprofit syndicators, and we do new markets tax credits as well. So we have our own CDE, we apply for our own allocation, and then we're also an equity investor. And then we do SBIC, or Small Business Investment Corporation, investing. So that's sort of our bucket across. How we approach all of those tools is we're always trying to find new ways to use those tools that will increase the value to communities. So if any of you have done like new markets, a lot of people will be like, oh my God, I'm never doing that again. Like that was the worst experience. We're trying to change that. Like we want people to see the value in that tool because it is extremely valuable. So one of the things that we do as an equity investor is we pay more for tax credits just straight out of the chute. What that means is we can make lower deal sizes work. So most people right now in the market, they may be paying 82, something like that. We're starting at 93 cents. So that right there gives us a lot of leeway in the size of deals that we can do. We can make a $3 million new markets deal work, both because of we pay more, but also because we skinny down in terms of consulting fees, legal fees. We really keep an eye on the clock. We don't do all these calls. Like we will literally like call out like, we are not going to spend $500 to get on the phone to talk about whatever it is people think they need to talk about. Like we really try to really put a bright light on the cost of these transactions because while no one is technically paying for it, you're paying for it if you're the nonprofit that's involved in the transaction because your subsidy is actually being reduced. So we try to be very, very mindful of that in the new markets deals. So how we work with purpose-built very directly was we work in Atlanta, so we've done investing in Atlanta and have known purpose-built for a long time and the Cousins Foundation. And so when Greg Giornelli was starting purpose-built schools in the city of Atlanta and was taking over the 3 worst performing schools there and doing the purpose-built schools model within those schools, he's really a startup business. And so he really needed access to startup capital. So they had gone out and were talking to various banks about a loan, and they asked us, would we be interested? We said, sure. So when we met with them, they were really thinking that we were going to give them more of a traditional line of credit sort of proposal that Greg could use to sort of start this business. But what we did was we came back with an operating only new markets. So no real estate at all involved in this transaction. Basically what you're able to do is you can take 12 months worth of operating expenses and run them through a new markets tax credit model to create the same subsidy that you create in a real estate deal. The difference is that's cash equity subsidy that goes back into the business rather than into the actual real estate. And in this case, what we also did was we embedded a CDFI in the structure. So we took A&DP, which is a local CDFI in the city of Atlanta that buys and rehabs houses and then sells them, and was working around the schools that Greg was working with in the purpose-built model. And we embedded them in this whole structure. So I won't go through the whole diagram, so it's kind of complex. But at the end of the day, when the 7-year period is up and the whole thing collapses, Greg ends up with about $2.9 million in cash equity that goes back into his business. A&DP ends up with $900,000. So it was a really great way to sort of look at this more holistically, but also add real value back into this community in a sort of non-traditional way. And I would also say that purpose-built too, like they had done a New Markets deal for the school building, and they were a little bit like, no, we don't think we want to do that. Like that, Cousins Foundation was like, no. But we think, at least, from Greg's perspective, they found it to be a very positive experience, and we're really excited about the opportunity. Greg always tells me, like, don't tell people you did that, like, because I want to do another one. But it's not like, it is a limited resource, obviously, from the CDE perspective, but of course we want to do more, and we're always looking for new opportunities.
Thanks, Debbie. So Todd, a special thanks for coming even after I told you what we wanted you to do, which is in 5 minutes summarize opportunity zones and opportunity funds. It would be great if you could help network members think through knowing a little bit about the kinds of work they do, the community assets they want to build, things about the program like general return expectations, which, as we've discussed, are just all over the place, and issues around control and exits. So spending a little bit of time on those things, because I think for members, those are things that they need to think through. But please.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you to Purpose Built, and thanks for everyone here for indulging us in trying to explain a little bit about how we think about capital. First, a little bit about our firm. We are brand new. Declaration Partners is the family office for David Rubenstein, the co-founder of the Carlyle Group, as Kim mentioned. One of the things that's unique about David, and there are many, is that he has made a very early, very consistent, and very public commitment to donating 100% of his wealth away to charity. And so our purpose as a family office is explicitly to increase his wealth such that we can then increase the giving. So in a very fundamental sense, we are a social-oriented business, although not the one that, not all that similar to what people think of when they think of social-oriented businesses. In some ways, actually, we're quite the opposite of the way Debbie described herself, so sort of, pricing like a foundation, but underwriting like a bank. We're kind of the opposite. We price like true equity investors, although have a social mission involved. And so one of the reasons that we've been so focused on the opportunity zones when the legislation came out, and I'll spend a second describing how they work for those who don't understand. Okay, sure. One of the reasons that we focused on it is we really want to lean in to the extent that we can lean in on business opportunities that have the potential to accelerate our market rate returns, or in other words, to improve or increase our profitability, but also have a social benefit. Well, then we can be achieving 2 goals at the same time, with the third goal being, well, the increased profit will then again be donated for charitable work. So it's something that we're very excited about. One of the things that's really unique, I certainly did not anticipate this when we started down this path, is that we don't believe that we're alone in these thought processes. We believe that there are many other family offices, high net worth individuals, the mass affluent, as well as the extremely wealthy, who are all thinking about it the same way. We believe that there are many people, while the world of fund managers has started to talk about the tax benefits for the opportunity zones, which I will explain, and I think are real and very attractive. We believe that there is also an undercurrent of investors who are genuinely attracted by the notion of using their capital for investment to also do social good. And so we really hope to be at the forefront of that trend. We really hope to help as for-profit investors who are looking to make long-term investments for the benefit of the communities in which we invest. So what's an opportunity zone? I will try my best to explain it thoughtfully. Will admit that it's brand new, and I may be wrong about some of the things I say. We likely won't know for a while, so at least during this conversation, you may think I know what I'm talking about. So an opportunity zone is a brand new program that was created in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, principally intended to encourage investors to recycle gain, so investment proceeds that they have already invested in businesses that have now grown to be mature businesses and therefore have profit or gain inherent in them, and to, in a sense, de-invest or recycle their proceeds out of those investments on the theory that other people will likely buy those investments, and instead encourage them to invest in lower income communities for the purposes of helping to spur economic activity within low income census tracts, and as a result, hopefully to also spur job creation and sustainable economic development within those communities. In order to encourage that activity, there are three principal tax benefits that are offered to investors who choose to invest in opportunity zones. The first one, which is the one that many are focused on today because we are all short-term focused and this one really helps today, is that those investors who have gain, appreciation in any way, and choose to realize that gain today and invest in an opportunity zone fund, have the ability to defer taxation on that gain. You can defer it for as long as 2026, so today it's about 8 years. In addition, for those who make an investment that they then hold for that full period, you have the ability to actually reduce the amount of taxation that is required, to reduce it by up to 15%. So for easy math, if we presume that an investor has gain equal to $100, that if they sold that stock today, they would have to pay tax on $100 of gain. If they instead invest that $100 into an opportunity zone fund, they could pay tax instead on $85 in 2026. So that's already pretty attractive. That is not, those two functions are actually not the most attractive piece of the program in my view. The most attractive piece is that an investor who has invested that $100 in an opportunity zone fund hopes for that $100 to actually increase. Right? Otherwise, it would be a pretty poor investment. And so if that $100 it maintains its investment status in an opportunity zone fund for at least 10 years, then upon sale of the investment, there will be no subsequent capital gain on that investment. And so if the $100 turns into $200, $300, $400, whatever the number is, there is no taxation. The only taxation that would have been involved would have been the $85 original tax in 2026. So that's really quite an accelerator for investors who are willing to make a long-term commitment to invest in lower income communities. And as a result, many funds have started to sprout up, or investment managers have started to sprout up to try and raise capital for that benefit. And as I alluded to, many of those are talking about the tax benefits because they are undoubtedly attractive. We intend to do something broadly similar, but with a twist, to use your term, which is to say that we intend to invest for those tax benefits, but with hopefully a specific alignment for charitable good, so that we can leverage off of our dual missions of increasing profitability for the long term, but then also helping the communities in which we invest. So some of the questions, Kim, that you asked about how an opportunity zone fund may impact the communities in which you invest. First, it's important in order to attract opportunity zone capital, it's important to actually be located within an opportunity zone. So if you are not located within an opportunity zone, I'm sorry, this particular capital won't be very attractive to your location. If you are located within that, then there are questions of structure and timing. The most important time or structural component is likely the 10-year requirement. So an investor, in order to realize the main tax benefits, would need to maintain their investment for at least 10 years. That is pretty different from typical private equity investors. Private equity investors, for those who don't understand, are often non-taxable investors who are often looking for very high returns over relatively short time periods, and they realize the return and then recycle their investment. This is explicitly different. This is intended to make a long-term commitment. So for many of your communities, I believe that will be viewed as a positive, but it does change the nature of the community. The next piece that I'd say, and Kim alluded to this question as well, is that there is a lot of uncertainty about exactly how some of the regulations will come into play, in particular for those investors who are seeking to make not a real estate investment, but a business investment. Venture capital is something that isn't attracted to these areas or to the opportunity zones. I'm sure there are certain communities that would like to start businesses within their communities, or members within your communities that would like to start businesses. And if those businesses succeed, if they grow tremendously, the opportunity zone capital could be very attractive, both for them and for the investors. But that piece of the rule book has yet to be written and is still a little unclear. I'd say the biggest opportunity and thing that we're most focused on is in the multifamily housing space. I imagine we're not alone in this. I know we've talked about it through the conference. But affordable housing is a problem for much of America. And that's true whether the affordable housing is designated or regulated as affordable, or whether it is market rate, but still at levels that would qualify as affordable for workers, in the middle class or below in your neighborhoods. In our view, there have some of the existing regulations, some of the existing incentive programs for the development of affordable housing, while they work in limited fashion, have not really worked in the aggregate to solve the problem. And we are hopeful, although not definitive, but hopeful that the opportunity zone space can really be a big boost and make a significant dent in that problem, in large part by incentivizing the creation of new supply. And anyone who has taken an economics course would understand that if the supply of a particular good or commodity increases tremendously while the demand remains approximately the same, then the price should fall. And that is something that, while investors, one would think, would not be very happy about, I think in this case, investors are pretty excited about it, because we believe that the particular development won't necessarily have lower rents. We'll underwrite those appropriately and achieve a market return, but also because, importantly, we believe that the aggregate increase of supply of housing in America is something that is a fundamentally good thing, in particular for those who need that housing.
Todd, thank you. Super interesting, and I like opportunity zones with a twist. That's great. Debbie, I know Northern Trust is working on an opportunity zone that's community-focused as well. It would be great to hear from you on that.
So, for any of you that know me, this will not be a surprise, but it's very cynical of sort of the whole thing, I guess. That's sort of where we started. And then the other thing I would say for a lot of other panels I've done, which is sort of funny, I'm always like that, the barbarians are at the gates. And so I would say, especially for you that are sitting in here that are doing community development, while that may be a bit of a reach, it may not be. Because at the end of the day, this is about people coming in and investing in your community. And you're not going to have a lot of say in sort of what those investments are. Unless you own the property, unless you own the ground, unless you are the person that actually has the deal in doing and negotiating for what you think is best. So that's the first thing I would say. Because, the reality is people are going to try to maximize their profits. Just like you said, that is what they're trying to do. So, we see this sort of risk that, particularly if you are in a community that is maybe low income now, but it's heading towards gentrification, this could definitely accelerate that process and could actually cause significant displacement in your community, because most of what would be going in would be high income condos. We're seeing sort of some different kind of real estate around long-term hotels, things like that, that aren't necessarily going to add to the community, but really extract from the community, so more of a wealth extraction strategy. Not intentionally, but sort of that's what's going to happen. We are worried about that. So one thing that I would say is basically about controlling land and making sure that when you're looking at your community that you sort of know what's going on, working with your government officials. We've been having a lot of conversations in terms of what's government's role in all of this and how can they come up with some guardrails, some protections, some way to sort of vet these things and see what makes sense. So that's, I think, another thing. I think to educate yourselves in terms of what this tool is, who these people are, who's working in your communities, and make sure you have a voice. And then the other is, if you have deals, seek out nonprofit partners like LIIF and Enterprise and LIIF and others that are CDFIs that can help you evaluate, so that if you do have a deal and it is going to be able to attract equity, which could be a great thing, and you could have multiple offers, you get multiple term sheets, that you can actually look at those and evaluate which one actually makes the most sense. Because the other thing about this is that there has to be an exit. And so what that exit usually means is sale, right? I mean, it usually means in order for the fund to actually get the money out, they're looking for a sale. Now, there's a lot of right now in terms of uncertainty in the IRS, or even the new things that came out, what you might be able to structure around that in order to sort of lessen that. But just if you just take it sort of on the surface level, it basically means at the end of 10 years, that property has to be sold to the highest bidder, which means you no longer own it or control it, if you really look at this. So I think there's a lot of risk for communities, a lot of opportunities for communities, a lot of risks for communities, but I think it all falls to us, and to you more specifically, that work in this space, to be really knowledgeable and to really figure out how you can use this tool for your community instead of the tool using your community, because I think that's a real risk. So what we're doing at Northern, because of all of this, is that we have been working with enterprise community partners on trying to stand up a fund a bit differently. And really, it's a learning exercise. We're not really trying to make a profit on this, but we're trying to figure out sort of how could this tool potentially be used, and are there pathways forward for others who may be willing to actually take a lower return if they were going to create more impact. And maybe no one wants to do that, we don't know, but we're at least gonna try, and we're at least gonna see what might be possible. So we're starting this fund with enterprise. We're looking at making a $15 million commitment. And some of the projects, like the first project we have was a for-profit project, multifamily, where it was 100% market rate, but it was part of a larger redevelopment community, similar to purpose-built, but not a purpose-built community, but it was a for-profit project. And so what we did was we went to Enterprise went, and they said, if we have lower cost capital equity that's willing to come in, would you be willing to do a set aside? And they said, yes. Not only yes, but we would be really excited about that. So we're gonna get a 20% set aside in a building that wouldn't have had it otherwise. So for us, those are the kinds of opportunities that we think that this tool could be used for, would be to sort of create affordability long-term, at least for that 10-year hold period, that you would not otherwise have, and perhaps introduce for-profit developers to affordable housing, and maybe make it so that they would be more willing to do these things. The other thing we're really interested in sort of looking at is community ownership. So at the end of that 10-year period, and there is a sale, who does it go to? And so are there ways to sort of set it up so that it's actually owned by, sold to another nonprofit in the community, or there's some sort of exit strategy that actually is around community ownership. And then we're also looking at whether or not there are ways to actually, in some states, that allow some type of investment trust or something like that, where you could actually aggregate community capital that would allow them to invest in some way with the opportunity zone money, in order, again, to sort of create wealth creation, because obviously in terms of ownership, having local community owners figure out how to participate in this is where we think we could add the most value.
If I could just take the opposite side
absolutely.
for a second.
No, please do.
I knew that was coming. Please, go ahead.
And look, certainly we appreciate that gentrification is a complicated problem, and that there are at times winners and losers, and sometimes the losers are people who have been longstanding members of the community, and that's an outcome we'd like to avoid. So there's no question that it's complicated. I will take the opposite side and suggest that just because a for-profit investor wants to make an investment in a community, that does not mean that there's something bad happening, right? It does not mean that there's something that's taking away from the community. And I'll just use the first deal that we happen to be doing in an opportunity zone. I'll just use as a test case or an example, perhaps, to try and allay that fear, or at least explain the way that we're thinking about it, and admitting that there are multiple sides to every discussion.
And lots of different investors.
And lots of different investors, that's true. So the first one that we're doing is actually in the community of Yonkers, New York, which is a community that has had ups and downs over the years. It's obviously in a wonderful location along the Hudson River, 28 minutes by train from to Grand Central Station, to the heart of New York City. We are purchasing a surface parking lot and a single-story factory or storage area that has outlived its useful life, and the owner of the land, who owns the factory, would like to move their business to a different location. And so we are purchasing that, and for the purpose of building approximately 400 market rate units. There will be, because of the way that Yonkers works with the jurisdiction, there will be 10% affordable, sort of regulated affordable units. But in fact, all of the market rate units we believe will be affordable for incomes based on demographics there, and will certainly be well under 50% of the cost of similar apartments in New York City. So we think that's already affordable. And one of Yonkers, like many cities of their size, and they're the fourth largest city in New York State, has some challenges, including funding of schools, funding of community programs, and funding of police and other community needs. And there are several options for them to increase those funds, many of which often revolve around property taxes. And so increasing property taxes for existing residents without allowing further development is something that would burden existing residents. And so that's not a great alternative. And so instead, allowing or spurring development that brings in 400 new residents and increases the property tax base, plus all of the sort of associated sort of small development related impact fees and other things, actually allows Yonkers to have a more stable and more strong financial base to allow them to produce all of the services that their residents so desperately need, while at the same time allowing for an investor like us, and we're not the only one, to make a for-profit investment that also has the benefit of providing not just the 10% included regulated affordable units, but also the other 400 units for the purpose of market rate residents. And so we think a project like that, which is something that could work in many of your communities, is something that really is a win-win. And our intention is to focus on those win-wins. And we believe that overall the market as a whole and America as a whole will really benefit from that, in particular for those people who need the housing.
I just want to compliment we're trying to be bipartisan here in this conversation. In Yonkers, as an example, to your point, JP Morgan Chase has been very much invested in Yonkers for a number of years, and we've worked with organizations like West Tab, community builders, with that same sort of thinking that I think you were referring to, this idea of really controlling the assets while change is happening. We completely understand that Yonkers, as one example, and maybe tied to what you guys are thinking, is this place where transit is accessible, where there's opportunity for growth, where people are looking for more affordable options and willing to pay more in places outside of New York. Ultimately, we've empowered West Hab, Leviticus Fund, which is also a CDFI, to also create a housing plan around that. So to your point, this is not sort of this haphazard effort that the city is looking to do just to build market rate to complement some of the moderate and low income work, but rather there's a real plan in place. And the firm and the foundation have supported that sort of outlook around housing as being a critical part, so that we're not blindly investing without a true partnership amongst the city and those officials sort of thinking about how do we look at equitable development? How do we look at inclusive development in that regard? So I think the point too here is that, and I would imagine folks here in the room, we want inclusive growth. We want success. We want to see progress. I think at the end of the day, we want that to happen so that everyone really benefits from it. And some of the tools in the toolkit include obviously the creation of land trusts that have a level of sort of a covenant and permanent sort of control. Now the equity component, of course, is where you lose, but as a land trust, that piece of property, that asset, really stays within that community and it gets control. Obviously, in your communities, you're not going to have control over every particular part of what happens there, but I think that's the nature of how we operate, and I think that's the nature of business. You can be at the table. You can be at the negotiating table. And I think that's going to be where I think the difference is, as opposed to sort of hearing from it and learning from it afterwards and then reacting to it in a way that's almost too late.
Right, and I would say the other thing is, obviously, we have seen this play out, all of us have seen it, and gentrification itself is not bad. Displacement is the issue. And so that is really what I'm talking about. So how can you do this in a way that actually does not displace people? Because that is usually what happens. So, you can make all these arguments about, a healthier community, which is great, and that's what we are all working towards. But if your healthy community displaces people and the poverty just moves to another area, which is sort of what we've seen for the last 20 years that we've been doing this work, then that's not particularly helpful. The other thing, and I don't think Ian is here any longer, but as he was pointing out to me when we were talking about this too, is that we've sort of been there, done that with this whole idea is if you just build a lot of things, that everything will be better. And unfortunately, that is sort of what this tool is, and I think we just need to keep that in mind too. And that is why purpose-built exists, because if it was just about building things, we would need purpose-built. But it's about much more than that. So I think that's the other thing to just keep in mind about this whole topic.
So opportunity zones, an incredibly high potential tool for our communities, not without some risks, need to be thoughtful. We're also looking at structures which would have a friendly entity own for the 10-year period, and the exit that was talked about is selling back to the community. So you kind of control that exit. So point being, there's ways to do this, and there's people to work with where it could be a boon. And I'll say one last thing, which is maybe implicit, maybe everybody understands this. One of the reasons there's so much discussion and passion is, so many of the resources we use, like LIHTC or new markets and other subsidies, they're all limited, they're all allocated. There's not enough of them. This is a resource that's virtually unlimited. It's just the amount of capital gains in the country. And so we're talking about billions and billions. You probably know exactly.
6.2 trillion.
$6.2 trillion. So that's why this is so important, because there's nothing else that I know of that we have access to like this, that has this potential, that is virtually unlimited. It's just harnessing it in the right way. So with that, I will open it up for questions. There's a mic up here.
Just while we're waiting, on the 6.2 trillion point, I was doing some mental math because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I was trying to think, we have, some research says there are 7.2 million affordable units that are a shortfall of 7.2 million affordable units in the country. And so if I just thought, well, how much does it cost to build, pick an average of, $200,000 a unit across the country, give or take, it's $1.5 trillion of cost, of which if you said developers, borrow 2/3 and invest 1/3 of equity, that's less than $500 million of equity needed. Relative to the $6 trillion available in this program, it's really not that much. So I actually think that we as the investment community, right, could really make a real positive dent in this without having to give up on returns or do anything else that would be bad, and we can still really help communities, and that's our goal.
Yeah, great point. Please.
Hi, I'm Tanya Maness from the City of Cleveland, and one of the things we've been struggling with opportunity zones is there's not a lot of guidance on how to build funds. So I'm interested to hear that there is a fund being built with Enterprise. I'd heard that before, that Northern Trust is involved in a fund, because that does seem like the best way to ensure that communities across the board benefit from opportunity zones where you are distributing the risk of the capital. And so wondering how you're doing that. And then just because we brought up the 6.2 trillion, right now we're on a very short time frame, and I know we can't look in the political crystal ball, but if some of you are hearing that this is something that is going to continue, because right now I think all the investments are supposed to initially be committed in 2019, and that seems really tough to make happen. Thank you.
You want to talk about the last part, maybe?
Sure. The 2019 isn't an end date for making investments. It's that the largest incentive for making investments is by the end of 2019. So the largest incentive is, the sort of to get all three, right? The tax deferral, the tax reduction, and the plan. And so the largest reduction is that if one makes an investment by the end of 2019, that gives them a full 7 years before 2026. As a result, and this is technical, so I apologize, but as a result, it means that investors get a full 15% reduction in their deferred capital gain. If they make an investment after 2019, but before the end of 2021, they still get a 10% reduction. And then if they get, and if they end up, moving past 2021, closer to 2026, they get no reduction on their gain. They still get a deferral of the gain until 2026. Although obviously, the greater the time period of a deferral, the more valuable it is. So there is. So hopefully that clarified some of the confusion around that point.
And in terms of the funds, like everyone's just sort of muddling through at this point. So there's some IRS guidance that just came out, and everyone's trying to read that and sort of internalize it. I think people are sort of waiting for what the tax attorneys are going to say, because really this is tax driven. And there's a hope that there'll be more guidance, particularly around fund creations and how this could be used for things other than real estate. But I know Enterprise is active, LISC is active. They're creating several funds. So I think all the CDFIs are probably going to be looking at it in some way, shape, or form.
I think that's right. So I would encourage you to educate yourselves. There's a lot of resources out there, just like Novogradac has information on LITEC, a lot of information on this. There's just a lot of information out there. And talk to your local CDFI, LISC, and Enterprise, but I know, as Debbie said, a lot of us are looking at this. We maybe haven't made announcements, but, or your local bank, talk to them. Because I think a lot of people are thinking about this, and I think it will be important to be educated. Please.
Hi. Many of us are from medium-sized, smaller-sized cities. I'm Don Bernhard from Allentown, Pennsylvania, where we have already identified 10 sites that are either in public control or nonprofit control that we really want to drive a project. But my question is, do you think there will be national-scale funds that are seriously interested in investing in the smaller cities, or will they just be really zeroed in the bigger cities where the investors are from and they know the developers and trusted developers? So we're weighing how much effort to put into chasing that kind of capital versus creating our own fund. And the answer is probably some of both, but I'm interested in your perspective on that.
That's your question.
So I'd say it's an unclear. The answer is unclear at the moment. I think as Debbie mentioned, this is pretty new. A lot of people are thinking about it. I don't think anyone, including us, really has a great sense as to exactly where investor demand will point to. I think the question of whether investor demand will be spurred in smaller cities relative to larger cities often is a question of where investors can get the best returns and get the best liquidity, right? So when you think about what investors look for, often investors have invested in the largest and in the growing cities, in part because they have the most liquidity, in part because they have the most diverse economies, in part because they have very often, certainly in the Southeast in particular, they have the best demographic growth and change, and so all of those dynamics are really helpful from an investor standpoint. I'm hopeful that in large part because of the 10-year commitment, that liquidity becomes a lower focus, at least sort of ratcheted down on the investor preference list, and therefore that there are there's sort of more of a push from investors to invest in other areas that would otherwise have been sort of redlined off of sort of your standard liquidity-focused investor lists. But I think it's an unclear question or an unclear answer at the moment.
So the one thing I would say is you don't have to have a fund to do an investment. Mm-hmm. So you can have a single project investment as well, and a fund is you self-certify. So there's not a huge process to go through. So what we have seen with our client base so far, the ones that have been doing this have been doing it, they would have done the investment anyway, so they were already making real estate investments out of their family office or wherever. And so they are picking areas that they know that they would have invested in, they've certified it, and it's not an opportunity zone investment.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful. And for a small city of 100,000, it's had over $1 billion of investment in its downtown. So our task now is carry that out into the neighborhoods. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Spartanburg, and I'm looking at this as a previous city manager where the city and the community had significant influence, typically in investments that came to our most distressed areas. And I see this program as having the potential of the local community having very little influence on the investment potentially. So I want to, and I see where we have the purpose-built initiatives and other coordinated initiatives where we will have influence. There's land control, there's other process. So I'm thinking about how a community, if it's not too late in a political environment that doesn't regulate particularly capital flow, right? That doesn't have inclusionary zoning, how a community may get in front of those, potentially get in front of some of the decisions. So it is at the table. So these areas outside where we control land and we have other means of influence. For example, typically an investor would come and they would be seeking tax breaks, right? So that was we had a gatekeeping capacity there. That if the deal didn't deliver community benefit sufficient to meet our expectations, then we could withhold the tax benefit. So any thought there that how a community may get ahead and have some ability to influence transactions to generate the benefit that it would like to see and more equitable benefit associated with this tool? That's a big open-ended question. So any thoughts you may have?
So I think you mentioned, so when you talked about the 10% set-aside, so I think set-asides, affordability set-asides, and zoning are probably the two, and I know sometimes that can be controversial, and you have to go through city council or whatever it is you have to do to pass that, and you could have local developers that are saying, wait, why do I have to do that? I'm not doing opportunity zone stuff, that kind of thing. But I do think that, and I think that example was, kind of spot on, like 10% has to go towards affordable because it's written, actually is part of the housing code. So I think having housing plans with those kinds of stipulations is what you need to do.
So the inclusionary requirement predated the opportunity zone requirement in Yonkers?
Right, so Yonkers went through a master plan process over the course of probably about 2 decades, and it finally came to fruition just before the downturn, which obviously delayed the investment in Yonkers. But yes, as part of that plan, I think you're spot on. As part of that plan, they went through a whole range of of requirements that they would like, including inclusionary zoning, open space, other requirements.
Do you see markets where, sorry to monopolize, but markets where the opportunity zone investment will be sufficient to drive without other public involvement, other than the typical zoning approvals?
There was probably no public
So
involvement.
these are the potential as standalone,
Otherwise.
no tax break, no
absolutely.
other pieces of public
I know
involvement.
so the deal that we are looking at doing, it's just private deal. So there's no government dollars involved.
And there's there are private equity firms today investing in workforce housing, right? So, and in charter schools. So there's private equity firms today. I guess our hope would be that layering on, if you will, an opportunity zone component so that adds value, and hopefully some of that value can be pushed to the community as opposed to just the added value, or added return, I should say, being put in the investor's pocket. But there's a lot of that going on.
And if you're looking to really look to formalize a plan around this process, we just recently funded what we call equitable development plans, neighborhood development plans, through our PRO competition, which is a partnership for raising opportunities. Are you raising your hand? Thank you. I got a fan out there. The equitable development plans are just that. It really creates a map and a pathway for you as an organization, but it also outlines where is this capital going to come from and who we're going to draw it into. We brought cities in, and we've just experimented with this. We have 18 already, had 36 applicants, and we can only pick 18, about $100,000 grant to start. But it lines us up and gets those CDFIs and CBOs prepared for our national grant, which is not duplicative. We have the $500 million, but we also have our PRO competition, which is a $125 million CDFI, CBO initiative that's $3 to $4 million for a 3-year period. So combined with this sort of idea that maybe the next level of equitable development plans are a plan to say, hey, we have looked at opportunity zones and how does that come into play and how does that work with our plan? It brings decision makers and policy makers into the room. So I would encourage you to look at that for your community.
Yeah, great idea. Thank you. Sir.
A little shorter than that guy. I'll start by saying this is completely out of my area of expertise, but there's a question that keeps going through my mind that I'd like you all to answer. In the 70s, something like this was utilized. In the 90s, we had enterprise zones, and those were an admitted failure where communities were actually ATMs for, business people. So I'd like you to explain to me how opportunity zones are different than an enterprise zone other than the name, and how it's going to actually work differently to benefit communities, because frankly, I'm skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that the difference from the opportunity and the enterprise zone is the fact that they've created this vehicle that allows unrealized capital gains to be boosted. And so there is an actual tax benefit that there wasn't in an opportunity zone, in an enterprise zone. So it's not, it's different in that way, and that there is actually this mechanism which allows someone to take those unrealized gains and invest them and create substantial benefit to the person that owns those capital gains to do that investing. So it's very, very different in that way. But yeah, I think that we've heard that comment before, we've done these zones and communities haven't benefited. So having said that, they've created a mechanism that it works on the investor side. Have they created a mechanism that makes sure it works on the community side? I would argue no.
Frankly, if I might interject, the communities came out on the bad end of
Right.
that.
And
There
so-
were actually demonstrable
Yeah.
negative impacts
Right.
on those communities.
Yeah, so that's the fear. And obviously that's sort of where I started with my comments. That is like a fear.
Yeah, and
Thank
we've
you.
been calling it the Opportunity Zone Program, but it's really, it's something just driven by the IRS, and it's a check the box, like the mortgage interest, like the home mortgage interest deduction. You self-certify and you take this benefit. So I think that the conversation earlier about the communities getting involved and whether it's through zoning or what have you, I think that's the mechanism that's going to be needed to make sure it does, or to try to get it to benefit the communities, because it's not, unlike, say, the New Market Tax Credit Program where there is an impact component, right? There's a community benefits agreement. This can be used for positive development in the community, but there's not a requirement. That's not a requirement.
Right, and who's going to be the ones who are lobbying and those city council members to actually do the proper zoning? Because my experience is that community members don't get listened to near as much as investors and developers. Thank you.
I think that depends on the community. I don't know too many developers that feel like we have an easy time going through community approval processes. And I think, the best developers, the ones who actually are successful in going through those processes, usually get through because they make an explicit partnership arrangement where they actually try and work together with the community in order to try and come up with a plan that achieves the investor's goals as well as the community's goals. Clearly that would be our focus. I know that there are good actors and bad actors and plenty of people in between, but that's certainly our goal.
Hi, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm working on a rather sizable project. And we missed the opportunity zone by like 40 feet. Like literally, this is the census tract, here's the entry to the door. And so I've heard rumors that there might be a clause or something that, maybe the surrounding area of the opportunity zone, or can I build like a 40-foot bridge into the, I'm right there. Is there any type of solution to kind of?
We've heard no.
I haven't heard.
It's like, that's like, sorry. No. The lines are the lines. And when they did it, they could have taken surrounding when they made those designations at the state level. But once they're made, they're made. And they're set in stone.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ross from Portland, and we're working on a project in an area with an average rent right now about 65% MFI. And the tools that we've got are currently LIHTC primarily. That'll get us to 60. And we have great ambitions for our project to create a tremendous impact on the community that could create a much higher income profile as we're trying to attract the mixed income housing that is so important to the purpose-built model, along with early learning and education and healthcare. My question has to do with the exit and how the market will pursue the highest rents that it can for the takeout to drive the return. And then we wind up, say, in 10 years, if we are successful, we'll have the higher end market rate housing And we'll have the LIHTC housing, but we're once again in that barbell situation where you haven't got the housing in the middle. The workforce housing, we found in Portland, we've got a lot of market rate going up, and we've got a lot of LIHTC, but not a lot in between 60 and 120 MFI. So how can an opportunity zone investment be structured so that we're covering that full spectrum of income levels within the housing and not trying to drive the rents up at the takeout to maximize the profits, but actually secure that income profile so we have a good mix within the community?
I don't think there's a good answer for that right now, honestly. Everything's sort of new, and I think we have to sort of see how some of this plays out and what attracts investment. But I think some of that has to do with the exits, and as Kim was talking about, we don't know yet in terms of what the IRS is going to allow in terms of structured exits, and what's going to be allowed and not allowed. We know a straight sale works, right? Which is what you're saying you don't want to have happen. But whether or not there's the ability to actually structure some sort of exit where it's sold to friendly hands that are going to maintain the affordability or whatever, or whether there's some way for the city to put something on it that would maintain affordability. I think those are the sort of things. The one thing we didn't talk about that we, at least at this point, in talking to enterprise, think is a real thing is twinning opportunity zones with low-income housing tax credits in order to boost the returns, which could be huge. So it would really make deals pencil out that wouldn't pencil out otherwise. There's still a lot to be figured out with that. And probably what we're hearing is maybe not till like 2020 is like when that might actually be something by the time all the IRS things come out and everyone looks at it. And then there's also this issue of who the investors would be and all that. But that, I think, is a really positive side of opportunity zones if that actually works out and you end up being able to twin with new market or low-income housing tax credits. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Alba. I'm from Austin, Texas. We don't have an opportunity zone, but we have opportunity, I think. We do also face in the area where we're working kind of retail deserts for everything from food to community-oriented retail, just the basic things that you would need, including things like even other things that are not for-profit, like government services for like postal service and different things like that. So I'm wondering if you could speak to how any of these funds and mechanisms may help to bring community-oriented retail. In our mind's eye, we hope that we can do everything I think that we think of here is cross-sectoral and dual purpose. And so we are looking for opportunities to do that community-oriented detail for the purpose of both the actual service it provides and the community living room aspect, if you will, but then also for workforce development. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to, what these funding mechanisms may offer for that sort of project. Thanks.
You want to do that?
Do you want to go and then I'll...
Well, first off, I'd love to put you in contact with our program officer based out in Texas. I mean, one of the things I realized from this conference is that when I speak about JP Morgan, they say, who, what, where are you? But technically they know us as a firm, but they don't know our folks who are actually doing a lot of the legwork. So love to connect you there with someone who's doing a lot of that work. Just quickly, we focus on 4 pillars. Small business, which is in our wheelhouse. Financial health, which sort of looks to make more people bankable. We think more about financial coaching as opposed to crisis. Neighborhood revitalization, which is my area of focus, and then workforce development. The Advancing Cities work, in fact, is tied to this idea of combining and addressing multiple issues. Because workforce housing is very much tied to the idea of people being closer to where they work, making their lives easier and making their community easy. So first, I'll connect you with someone there. We are quite busy in Texas, as you can imagine. And in fact, I think we had our shareholders conference out there. So I think that ultimately we have a number of initiatives through our new skills efforts, which is looking at this idea of demand-driven work around employers, not necessarily saying we're going to create jobs, but what are the employers thinking? And what are the skills needed to sort of meet those jobs? I mean, we're going even beyond traditional, unfortunately, the K-12. We think some folks do need skill building if they're not on track towards college. And so those are some of the things that we're doing that really helps to highlight our work, and that's a national initiative that in some ways a lot of our regional program officers are investing. So I'll definitely want to connect you so you can get more of an understanding of what we're doing in Austin, and hopefully that helps to generate this idea around that. The other thing I'll mention is that we've also created an Entrepreneurs of Color Fund, which came out of Detroit, which was designed around supporting women and people of color who actually are looking to form their companies and really get sort of a boost in investment. Not a lot of capital, but enough to really start a business. And so if you're driven around this idea of creating this sort of retail that's locally owned, in some cases minority owned, that may be a vehicle as well to think about as we look to expand that program across our markets.
And I would say just in terms of a few words on the community asset piece of that, if you're talking about commercial, mixed commercial, retail, real estate development, depending on the size, new market tax credits is a great program for that if you're in a distressed census tract. I think there's also, if that doesn't quite work, you're not in the census tract or maybe it's too small, I do think CDFIs do that kind of lending. I know our fund does that kind of lending, but if you're not a member, CDFIs do. And then also there are CDFIs that specialize in small business lending. I know one based in Texas that I could connect you with. I mean, when you get to the point where you're trying to support the small businesses that are coming in, as well as a national SBA lender that may be of help. Are we time, Melissa? I guess we're time. Oh, okay.
That was the hook.
I wasn't keeping track.
Thank you so much. This is really rich conversation and really feels like just the beginning of a conversation. We're all on such a learning journey with all these instruments, but in particular the Opportunity Zone funds. And so we at Purpose Built pledge to you to keep you posted in whatever way we can through our partners and through sort of our own network communications. We will pledge to keep you posted on what we're continuing to learn and walk alongside you as you encounter these opportunities in your neighborhoods. I want to just thank our panel, Kim and Michael and Debbie and Todd. Thank you so much.